Hello team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video, a live stream with me, Jonathan MS Peers. Hello, I'm over here now. I'm not over there. I'm over here. Let me know if you can hear me. If you can hear me, that's awesome. I was hoping to get Matt Bishop, just a last minute thing, a guy that I have live stream interviewed before, just to help me with looking at some of the comments as I go through, because sometimes there can be quite a number of live comments going on, and it's difficult for me to be able to look at them and interact with them. He's in Australia, and it's probably way past his bedtime now. So anyway, where should we go to first? Well, I've obviously got the map. We're going to do the Frontline segment, Frontline updates to begin with. But before we go there, I am going to, good, you can hear me loud and clear. I'm going to just go through a few bits that have turned up since I did my news piece this morning, just to add to like the hits and losses bunch of videos and bits and pieces that I've already shown you, because I think there's a couple here that are quite important. So this is a strike in Donetsk yesterday. I can't show you all the video. Go and check these out. I'll try and remember to put these in the Discord server, so please join the Discord server if you haven't already. There's lots of conversations going on there. So this is a strike in Donetsk yesterday. It turned out to be very significant according to a number of different sources. Here, Tim White saying a Russian base of Lancet and Zala drones was hit in the village of Luhansk. Confusingly, it's in the Donetsk region, so Luhansk is in Donetsk. But anyway, so you've got a pretty big explosion going on there, taking out quite a few people by the looks of it in that, and Lancer and Zala drones being taken out there as well. So that's quite a significant hit, worth adding. Then here we have Russian warehouses are on fire. In the direction of Crimea, incendiary fire shown from paratroopers of the 95th. So I don't know quite what that means, but other than there's some significant fire and explosions going on there near Crimea. I don't know if that's a military. I presume that's a military target that's been hit. That is maybe an ammo depot or something. So again, that was a significant hit as well. And then this, I want to add this because there's been quite a bit of talk about this on the socials. A huge fire has broken out in Russia again. This is in Bashkortostan. Fuel oil pits at a bitumen production plant caught fire. The area is 300 square meters. So there's lots of footage of a big fire going on there. And the reason I want to bring this to your attention is because there's something that Putin has just said. But I'm going to circle back to this at the end of this video to give you an example of how he's talking nonsense. Okay. And the last bit in this kind of intro section I want to talk about is this. I found this really interesting, and this has happened a couple of times where people have seen some footage of command centers. In this instance, it's General Mark Milley at I don't know, NATO command center or something, US military center, something going on, and people pay a lot of attention to the mapping that's going on in the background, what they're looking at. And some people have kind of made criticisms before about sensitive material being shown on pictures like this, but I find this really significant. Sorry, something James Cottle's just said there, right? So strange watching at normal speed, right? I am used to watching and listening to everything at least 1.5. I basically don't listen to any books or watch any YouTube if it's not 1.75 to 2 times speed, right? So I listen to people really, really quickly, and I can get through more content in a day. And when you get used to doing that, when you listen to them speak normal speed, so I listen to Ukraine, the latest podcast, at 1.8 times speed. And when I have to play it back to play you guys some excerpts of it, they sound literally like they're how do I say this in a kind of PC way, like mentally quite slow, and they sound ill, and it's just I really can't, like, my God, you don't speak like this. You speak like twice as quick as that. Oh no, you don't. I speed you up. Yeah. So I understand what James is saying there. Anyway, this is fascinating. So the open source map used by US military. So it's a very good thing that the map of another team, so this is GeoConfirmed, who's a really on it GeoConfirmation. It's kind of a network, actually. There's a lot of people that contribute to GeoConfirmed and geolocating bits of footage. So this is a really good open source intelligence source saying another team UA control map is used by the military. So it's Ukraine control map. That said something about the quality provided by volunteer OSINT and mapping groups. I think this is really important. So people like Andrew Perpetua, who I've had language learner on, who's a combat medic on a front line, saying it's the best map. I use it all the time, and I'd save people's lives by referring them to the map. Right? And the work of open source intelligence people, like putting these maps together, is so important, and in a lot of instances, incredibly accurate, right? We are also working together, says GeoConfirm, with UA control map, Ukraine control map. They track the units and their frontline is integrated in our map. In the open source community, a lot of mapping teams are working together to make sure we don't all do the same. And if we do the same, then it's double checked. You can't be sure enough with all the armchair experts around spreading and misinformation, disinformation being purposeful misinformation and misinformation being accidental wrong information. And you could call me an armchair general, whatever, but I don't see myself as part of this kind of setup, like these proper OSINT people. Like all of this volunteer work helps also with countering disinformation spread by official accounts. So to all the teams, Bellingcat and all these people that you list, Deep State, GeoConfirmed, UA Control Map, Defmon, thanks for all of your given free time to make sure people have a better insight into this war. I think it's really interesting that the US Army is using open source mapping to find out their mapping. And I've talked about this before. So when it comes to literally like US and British intelligence, and we had all these leaks before, we hear of like they're using Oryx to work out their stats, as if that's a stupid thing to do, or like that's like below them. It's like, why would the UK intelligence send like spies to the front line to count blown up machines so they can have like the most accurate way of finding out how many vehicles have been blown up on the front line is to trawl social networks, to count it all up, because everyone is sharing from the front line. Soldiers are sharing this stuff. That's how you get accurate information. So actually, open source intelligence is the most efficient way of getting an accurate sense of where troops are, what's been blown up, and what's going on the front line. So it's no wonder that literally the US military intelligence, yes, at their highest levels, they're going to be using military satellites, right? But even military satellites can't tell you exactly what's going on. You have to piece lots of bits of jigsaw together to give yourself a full picture. So you should be dipping into all of these different sources. And here, US military using open source sourcing, I think is testament to the quality of that sourcing. Right, let's go to look at the front line, as that's really why most of you are here. Here we have my map. So my map is an assimilation of two different mappers. The red line is Suryat Mat's pro-Russian mapper. Blue line is Andrew Perpetua, the I'd say objective mapper, pro-Ukrainian. These are the defensive lines of the Russian forces. The white line is the defensive line of the Russian forces as of before the counteroffensive started at the beginning of June. Right, so it's all about defensive lines here. I like having two mappers working here, and actually the other end of the each at the different end of the spectrum. I'll explain why when we get later on around the map, because actually it does give you a better understanding of what's going on. Right, let's go to the northeast sector, where this is Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea front line, and we're actually going to pop into the Institute for the Study of War just to get an idea of what's going on. So there appears to be geolocated footage to show that the Russians have made some progress in the forest belt northeast of Sinkivka. Okay, where is Sinkivka? Let's go up to Kupiansk here and to this place northeast of Kupiansk. We have Sinkivka there. There might be some gains around here, not represented by any mappers, although I think it's sort of confirming maybe what Suryat Maps has previously said. So Global War Monitor here says that Russia has advanced slightly towards the heavily fought-for town of Sinkivka. And that, I think, is in line with this gain there. Sinkivka appears to be, approaching being surrounded, but there are differing understandings of how accurate, say, Suryat Maps and the Russian MOD are in making their claims in this area. However, there's geolocated footage to suggest that they have made advances. I can't show you this; the media is too big for the browser-based version of Telegram, but there's footage on Telegram to suggest that the Ukrainians are shelling Russians in this position. So where are the Russians? Let's do some geolocation. And there we have it, that tree line, that junction. In fact, I've talked about that junction previously. That is where the Russians are at. And that is geolocated footage to suggest shelling there. You'd expect Andrew Perpetua probably to catch up with that in his next update. But anyway, that would suggest that Suriyat Maps is somewhat correct, at least in that part of their mapping. So some gains for the Russians there. Russian sources claim that Russians have advanced up to half a kilometer near Novoherivka. So if we come out of there and we go along down to Svatova, which is here, and we come to Ryarodka area, Novoherivka, in this sort of open area of countryside that it's in a grey zone, basically. Ukraine took it back from Russia after Russia took it after their attack through from the Svatova direction. Now, they're apparently, according to the Russians, they have advanced up to half a kilometer somewhere near there. Take that with a pinch of salt, possibly. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Yevlash has noted that Russian forces are conducting intense artillery fire all basically along this line. So the Russian artillery is still fairly active here. We talk about degradation of Russian artillery, but you can't extrapolate claims of one part of the front line and apply it to all across the front line. So my guess is that the Russians are going to be struggling with quality counter-battery artillery fire around Robotne, probably around Velika Novosilka, and certainly we've heard the Russians themselves claiming about a lack of counter-battery fire along the Dnipro River, or maybe even certain parts of the Dnipro River. That doesn't mean that they are struggling for artillery or ammunition in all of the front line. And here, the Ukrainians are claiming that Russians are still pretty active with their artillery. Okay. Finally, for this sector, several Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces are focusing on attacks in the Serebryanska forest near to Torska. So there we have Torska is there near the Serebryanski forest. So I think the Ukrainians have had some more joy in the forest of late. They've been pressuring there. There's actually some footage to suggest there's use of incendiary munitions in the forest. You often see the Russians use incendiary munitions when they are really frustrated and want to take it out on the Ukrainians who are being, robust in their defense or not shifting or whatever, and then they use incendiary munitions. So the use of it there might suggest that the Ukrainians have had more success in the forest than the Russians of late. Anyway, coming down, we heard that there was some success with the Ukrainians around Spurna yesterday. We're going to come on down to Bakhmut. Not a great deal of information coming out from Bakhmut. We're going to go to a general claim here from the Ukrainian General Staff. The defense forces of Ukraine are successful in the direction of Klishchivka, Peredchechny, Avdiivka, Kurdyamivka, and Dachny in the Bakhmut direction. So Yevlash, again, the spokesperson, saying that the Ukrainian military destroyed a tank, a BMP, a Mr. B, that's an artillery piece, a D-30 gun, another artillery piece, anti-aircraft missile, as well as other Russian vehicles, and 6 ammunition warehouses. So this activity of degradation of the Russian capabilities is going on, as of course we know. Daily figures show that, and that is taking place in Bakhmut as well. So let's go to the north of Bakhmut, and Suriyat Maps here says that the Russians have made small advances along the railway south of Bakhmut. Now, I think Suriyat Maps is using a video to garner that information, and that video is something that Andrew Perpetua has called into question. So in other words, there may not be a Russian advance there at all. So the video south of Bakhmut, people are misinterpreting the video. It doesn't depict a Russian advance. You will see a lot of maps wrongly claiming it does, which is a reasonable error to make. You cannot judge people for making it, but it is in fact wrong. In reality, the video depicts a repelled assault. In other words, that claim of advance there from Suriyat Maps is, according to Andrew Perpetua, an incorrect misinterpretation of the data, and there is indeed no exchange of territory. Now, as we come further down south, there's a lot of talk still about Klishchivka and Avdiivka. Mitch Mazarol, thank you, what a legend. Please hit the like button if you have not already done so, folks. It will help the YouTube AI booster stream. You too, Trevor. I love a bit of Mitch. He's a bit of a legend. Thanks, mate. So here we have Klishchivka, which is this this settlement to the south of Bakhmut, which, as you all know by now, it is sitting beneath the higher ground to the west of it, so that this is a kind of ridge of higher ground with some serious trench works built into it. And the Ukrainians have been flushing the Russians out. They destroyed or basically hammered the ground line of communication, so it was unusable for the Russians, and they were unable to supply their troops, and it ended up sort of evacuating the last remnants of Russian personnel out into the tree lines along the railway line. And anyway, Suryat Maps now admits that here the Russians have been pushed back, but not fully. They haven't, there's still a few houses there. Anyway, Ukrainian army, according to them, continue advancing inside Klishchiivka and are about to take full control over the town. Russian army only controls positions adjacent to the railway map. To the railway, sorry, full stop. Map. Punctuation, important. So that is deep state map. So now in yellow, in certain areas of my map, I have the Russian defensive line as according to pro-Ukrainian map, a deep state map. Here we have all three mappers broadly agreeing that the Russians are struggling to maintain any presence in Klishchiivka. I would say they've been out of Klishchiivka for a good 24 hours. Deep state map showing some gains for the Ukrainians in pushing the Russians back towards the railway line here. This is going to be important for the Russians to be pushed back here. And then hopefully you'll see this whole railway track, which is on an embankment with flanked by two tree lines. Hopefully you'll see them have to pull out from there and pull back to this ground line of communication, main supply route coming into the south of Bakhmut through Opitne. There's lots of equipment, Russian equipment, I think, positioned around here. They kind of use it as a secondary line of defense anyway. But yeah, so Klishchiivka, I think, is pretty much under control of the Ukrainians. There are different claims about Avdiivka and whether that is under the control of the Ukrainians or whether it's still sort of a bit of a grey zone. I don't think you'll have any realistic Russian presence there. So I think it's at the very least grey zone and most probably controlled by the Ukrainians. But the problem is when the Ukrainians move into a position, and this is the same on the southern front line around Zaporizhia and basically anywhere really, is when Russians are taking up, say, trench lines, that won't be the case for Avdiivka, but it'd be buildings, right? When they take up particular defensive positions, the Russians are there and they know they're there and they have the coordinates for where they are, right? So when they pull out of there, they can just relay those exact coordinates because they built these fortifications. The Ukrainians come in and take those fortifications because they're decent defensive positions, even like a little bit going the wrong way, but they're still useful to be in the trench lines. And then the Russians know those coordinates and just hammer the positions. So it can be a bit of a poison chalice sometimes for Ukrainians to take up defensive positions in newly liberated fortifications. Because the Russians would just hammer them. Anyway, as we come further to the south, we come to Avdiivka. In fact, I probably should go to the ISW to just see what they say about Bakhmut. Just another Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces continue to counterattack in the Klishchiivka, Avdiivka, Kurdyivka area, but have not advanced in this area. The mill blogger claimed that Russian forces still control Avdiivka and Kurdyivka. So there are some who claim that the Russians still control Avdiivka. I don't think that's true. I think they probably do control Kurdyivka still. Hanna Malia, the deputy defense minister, stated that Ukrainian forces have liberated 2 square kilometers in the Bakhmut direction over the past week. So they are still making consistent gains in the area. Anyway, coming down now to Avdiivka, where there is quite a lot of activity taking place in and around Opitne. I've been quite, I guess, excited about, from my pro-Ukrainian positioning, about what's happening here. Reporting from Ukraine did their whole video on this area and talking about exactly what I was saying yesterday, how it's looking like they could do some pincer movement through Pisky to meet with the forces coming down from Opitne here, and possibly even try and take the airport. That would be really significant because of the place the airport has in the history of the war since 2014. There's been a lot of activity in and around the airport, famously so. As the 93rd Brigade were doing a lot of work there, all the way back to 2014, as I say. So yeah, this could be a bit of a pincer move going on. Let's go and see what some of the sources have to say. Not too much coming out as a result from yesterday. There's quite a lot of talk about Opitny yesterday, and we'll see that Syriac Maps is mentioning it here. The Ukrainian army are continuing to advance north of Opitny and reach the nearby outskirts of the town where clashes with the Russian army are taking place. So they still don't have the Ukrainians in Opitny, just sort of skirting around the outside of the town, which is, I think, possibly not what most other sources are saying. Here, for example, this is a Russian claim. I actually shared this with you yesterday. I didn't share the original quote with you. I shared someone else talking about this, so I just wanted to share you the translation. This is a Russian source saying, during a retreat of our troops, so Russian troops near Donetsk at Opitny, a tragedy occurred. We wrote that our troops retreated a little and the Ukrainians advanced towards Donetsk and the Donetsk airport. A source in the general staff told us new details of this troop withdrawal. Unfortunately, not quotes. So this is an interlocutor from the Russian general staff. Unfortunately, not everyone retreated clearly and harmoniously. Some of the fighters retreated to new positions chaotically and almost in panic. As a result of tragedy, our military died from the fire of their own artillery, our interlocutor said. So in other words, Syriac Maps seems to be wrong here, because this is a claim from the Russians that they retreated from Opitny and were hit by their own artillery, one would presume south of Opitny. Anyway, the claim continues. According to him, a large group of military personnel who were retreating towards the airport were covered. So this is retreating towards the airport. So the airport is south of here. Were retreating towards the airport were covered by their artillery. Quote, our people decided that the Ukrainians were going to seize the Donetsk airport and launched a massive attack. As a result, 27 were killed and 34 were injured. About half of the wounded had their legs or arms torn off. Several pieces of equipment were lost. It's just terrible, the source complained. According to him, this is not the first time the Russian military personnel have died at the front from Russian artillery fire. Yet we hear about this fairly commonly. But this case is especially creepy. No one understands how it was possible to confuse our people with the enemy. Investigations are currently underway, and I hope the perpetrators will be punished, our interlocutor concluded. And I wondered yesterday whether such an activity as that, such an event as that, could be barrier troops. We have heard, like, some Russian units, I wonder whether they're in the Avdiivka area, were complaining about artillery being used as barrier troops, as in if they were threatening to retreat themselves, they were saying they're going to retreat, they were threatened with not being shot by troops behind them, but by being hit by their own artillery on purpose. So there have been Russian claims of Russian artillery being used in the same way as barrier troops are used. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but it is a possibility. Thank you so much to Trevor. Not that Trevor. A different Trevor, a better Trevor. Thanks, Trevor. I presume you mean the other Trevor, Slava Ukraine. Yeah, definitely. So that's Trevor Shea, who is not Trevor Shea, but Ivan Popov or whatever. No, he's not Ivan Popov because he's a former commander. Anyway, you get my point. Thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate that. So that is some success in and around Avdiivka. That's really good news for the Ukrainians. And as I was saying, reporting from Ukraine was talking about this pincer movement potentially, but it's also coming from Novelsk as well. So they're having some joy in pushing the Russians back there through Pisky and at Opitny. So long may that continue. We'll go to the ISW. Now, I think I included all of this because is this a bit that tells you all the different options that could be going on? I'll read it. So Hanna Maliar, Deputy Defense Minister, stated that Ukrainian forces control part of Opitny. That was from early yesterday. So that's like almost 2 days old now. So I think they control all of Opitny, but noted that the situation is fluid and fighting continues. One Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced near Opitny and in the direction of Spartak. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces lack manpower, competent commanders, quality assault tactics, and counter-battery capabilities in this area of the front. So you've got one Russian saying, yep, the Ukrainians advanced. Another saying, we're really rubbish in the area. And then other Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces advanced to the outskirts of Opitny, but Russian forces immediately pushed them back and retained full control of the settlement, however. So you've got a whole range of claims to do with what is happening in Opitny, and that's why it's really difficult to work out what's going on. You had to, one of those latter claims is almost certainly Syriac Maps here is saying they were repelled here. Well, it's not what other Russian sources are saying. It's not what Ukrainian sources are saying, and it looks like it looks like Syriac Maps is is probably wrong there. Lawrence 22 says, point of order, Jonathan. I gifted 5 memberships and received the appropriate receipt from PayPal. You may wish to take it up with YouTube. I don't know what that means, Lawrence, but I'll speak to you in private if I can about that, maybe on a YouTube video, and take up what issue you have with there. But thank you very much, Lawrence. That's really very kind of you. Good man. Lawrence is indeed a good man. Let us now move out of that area, and we'll come down to, well, we won't really dwell on Mariinka. There's still activity there, but no particular granular news about what's going on. And we'll come round to the Velika Novosilka salient here, this sector where the Ukrainians have been somewhat quieter for a few weeks as they're refitting, it appears, before they go again. But while they're doing this, I talked earlier today, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I talked about General Petraeus's idea of the model of Ukrainian attack, which is stretch, starve, and strike. So they're stretching the Russian forces all across the front line defensively, and they are doing that with their own kind of probing attacks in lots of places to keep the Russians on their toes and therefore defending in lots of places. But the Russians are doing it to themselves. So they're trying to do diversionary attacks, say in the northeastern sector, which then means that they have to use their own troops to do that, which means they have to accumulate troops and equipment to try and make a diversionary attack. So those troops and equipment are not being used where they're needed on the southern front line, which means they're stretching their own defensive capabilities. So it's kind of like, is that, I was saying weeks ago, is that the wisest move for them? Nonetheless, that's a stretch. Starve is hitting all of the logistics consistently, also just attriting them generally. Air defense systems and artillery. So starving them, stretching them, starving them, and then you will get to a point where it is ready to strike. Now, what they are doing is also doing probing attacks to find out weaknesses for a future major strike. And sometimes they take advantage of those weaknesses, such as Novomayorsk here and Novodonetsk, where there were some other claims, unverified, that the Russians had pulled some troops from here to support their activities, their defensive activities over here in Robotne. Now, if that's true, then it could be that the Ukrainians saw or knew about that and then knew that these areas were weak and took advantage by doing probing attacks, only with a few companies of troops, dropping them off with their MRAPs and APCs and whatnot, and then they go and take some buildings in, say, for example, Novomayorsk, and have some joy in taking territory, even with very limited resources. But they're not really putting any full power offensive capabilities towards here at the moment. Now, there are some claims that the Ukrainians might be having a little bit more joy around Pryutne. They conceded some territory, then I think maybe have regained a little bit. So there's quite a bit of activity taking place there, with the Russians doing their usual counterattack. They lose ground and then they try and take it back immediately. And we often talk about whether that is a wise thing for the Russians to do, because they've got a choice. You either sit back and soak up pressure and attrit the opposition by just being in your defensive lines, in your fortifications, and therefore you're less likely to lose a high level of troops because you're more defended, and you let the Ukrainians come to you and you attrit them, right? But what the Russians seem to be doing is, as soon as they lose a bit of land, they say, we need to get that back. I don't know whether it's for PR reasons. I don't know whether it's for whatever reason, but they then go on the attack as a form of defense. And in doing that, they are going to attrit more of their own, effectively more of their own defenders, rather than had they sat back and did more defending. They attack. Now, what happens is they take areas of land back, like at Pryutne, but at a cost of their own defensive capabilities. So the long-term outcome is that they're weakening themselves such that they are stretching themselves even more, if you like, by attriting their own forces. So they're more thinly then arranged in whatever position we're talking about, and then the Ukrainians can then counterattack more easily. Anyway, let's go to some of the sources for Donetsk, this southern Donetsk area, and there aren't too many things to say. Just the usual stuff, which is Ukrainian MRAPs and whatnot landing, or not landing, so driving up to the edge of Novomayorsk, what we were just talking about, the Shartanka River, and then sort of getting attacked by Russian artillery and whatnot. So this is in this position. So we know that the Ukrainians are dropping troops off here. Let's just plug that in. Yep. So this is exactly what we'd expect. We know that they've been dropping their troops off around here, so that there's just a bit of geolocation to up there. We've seen Ukrainian troops get hit in these houses as they're moving down here, and they have moved into the north of Novomyorsk, and they seem to be fighting over that at the moment. So the Shaitanka River is this river that comes down here that goes to the east over here, and indeed, I was under the impression that this might also be a bit of a river here, just to the north. I thought that's a Shaitanka, but actually it's north of the Shaitanka, which is down here. So this area where the Ukrainians are up to is, I think, a bit of a natural barrier too. That road might go along a little bit of a river, but if it's not, then it might be the Shaitanka River below that they previously got to, but it was a bit difficult for the Ukrainians to negotiate at that time with equipment and whatnot. Even though it doesn't look like the biggest river, you're still going to need to potentially, have bridging equipment or something to get across that. And on a previous attack, maybe last year, the Ukrainians got to there and then were forced back. So anyway, that's the Shaitanka River. But Suryat Maps here has some Ukrainian gains, not at Novomyorsk, but actually to the southwest of Novodonetsk, which I think is really good news for the Ukrainians, as well as making some gains, according to them, at Novomyorsk too. So the Ukrainians are trying to encircle the Novodonetsk from the south. They claim that the Russians repelled the Ukrainian attack. Moreover, troops continue consolidating the control over the northern shore of Shaitanka River, but didn't reach the town of Novomyorsk again during the last hours. Well, we have actually seen evidence. I've shown you video footage of Ukrainians in those buildings in Novomyorsk. So that's demonstrably not true from Suryat Maps there, and I think is rather charitable to the Russians there. Just a big shout out. Thank you, Joanne Mason. Looking forward to your sounds of exasperation when you play a video without sound, with sound. Thank you for your hard work. Joanne, I've already done that, right? But when I do this on Microsoft Edge, it doesn't. I've found out why you can't hear my videos on here. If I do it on Chrome, you can hear the videos. Unfortunately, Chrome is really hungry and it uses up a lot of computer power. So I haven't got any videos with sound that you need to hear the sound. But I played one earlier, but you didn't hear it, and I didn't cry out, but I could have done. Thanks, Joanne. Really appreciate that. So anyway, that's that. Let's move to another source here. Say I was going to move to the ISW saying about this area. Hanna Malia stated that Ukrainian forces have achieved unspecified successes near Novomyorsk. So the Ukrainians are saying that they're succeeding around here. We've got Suryat Map saying that actually the Russians have been pushed back south of Novodonetsk, and that means that this road here from Kremenchuk to Novodonetsk could well be interdicted. There's claims that it was interdicted. We've had claims it's been interdicted twice. Whether it still is, I don't know. And I think Novodonetsk is going to be a difficult one for the Russians to keep control of, given the activities to the southeast, but also between there and Novomyorsk. So I'd expect that to fall at some point relatively soon. Right, but still nothing about Zavitny Bazhan yet there, or really today. Just that I think ISW says, I think there is activity, north of Priyatne. Ukrainian forces unsuccessfully attacked, according to the Russians anyway, north of Priyatne. So activity around there. Right, we're going to come to the west now and come back to Robotne, which is kind of where it's all happening at the moment. As I've said many times, this is where the best Ukrainian forces are. This is where the best Russian forces are. This is where the most intense, the most densely mined fields are. It's where the most densely fortified Russian positions are, with the greatest amount of trench lines. So this is where it's all at. And I think the eventual outcome of what takes place here could well define what happens going forward. I mean, this is crucial. Now, first thing to say is that Andrew Perpetua did exactly what I thought would. I probably said it yesterday, that he has caught on to the Russian gains here that we saw from Deep State and Suryat Maps. And I was pretty sure there were Russian gains there. What Andrew Perpetua does is waits for shelling analysis, which might come after things like MOD announcements, or maybe a bit of video footage, or people having contacts on the ground telling you stuff. Andrew Perpetua can sometimes lag behind some movements, depending on whether he's deferring exclusively to shelling analysis from satellite imagery. And of course, that depends on good weather as well as like the timely provision of those satellite images. We see there that the Russians have done this counterattack north of Verbove. Here, you might argue that actually of all the places to counterattack, it could be important to do it here to try and hold on as much as possible. But then they do have the defensive lines here. So, you know, they can arguably soak up a lot of Ukrainian pressure. Is it wise that they're counterattacking? I don't know. Time will tell. To quote Geraman, the Russian source. Anyway, so yeah, activity taking place there. Success for the Russians, success for the Ukrainians, according to Deep State Map. Not huge. These are minor gains, actually, that we hadn't caught up with. So that's a few days ago gains. So that's JR doing that today. Thanks to JR who did the mapping today. I didn't have time. Really appreciate his assistance. He's a legend. And so yeah, there are still supposedly gains for the Ukrainians here. A lot of gains will be in the grey zone, so they might not register as pushing the Russian defensive lines back. I say that all the time. So, for example, here yesterday, Global War Monitor actually did 2 of these. First of all, had just this square there, and then increased it to that L shape. Ukraine's advancement towards Novopokrovka and Robotne in Zaporizhia Oblast has been expanded again due to recent geolocation. This is, remember, where those tanks were firing down at Novopokrovka. So that was geolocated, and that shows that the Ukrainians have made gains there. Now, this is P-Star 11 saying, as a Robotne update, in the eastern outskirts of Novopokrovka, the tanks of the armed forces of Ukraine are like on a training ground. The operational space is without mines. So that's a significant observation. There are no mines. The mines have been cleared, or if they... So we know that this kind of area was hugely mined before we got to the first major trench lines. We had some minor trench lines up here and a kind of major one there. But the minefields were all up here. And this is what caused the Ukrainians an awful lot of trouble. But as they got into the Russian defenses, these areas are less mined because the Russians needed to move between their lines of defense, right? So they don't mine their own kind of areas of supply. What they'd need to do is mine them as they retreat, or retreat and then send up remote mines, send up like their equivalent of ram shells that can drop a load of mines, maybe sometimes behind the enemy. But I don't think they've maybe had the mines or the ability to do that. And so therefore, as the further on the Ukrainians get, the less mined these fields are. So this claim is pretty important. The operational space is without mines. The Russian 1430 regiment equipped with T-55, according to sources, is no longer on the planet. The armed forces are advancing, the Ukrainian armed forces. This might also fit into the claim that 20% of deployed tanks, as Astraea Intel said, yesterday, 20% of Russian deployed tanks are T-55s and T-62s. If that's true, take that with a pinch of salt. But the general point is that there are a lot of old tanks, you know, comparatively speaking, in the Russian forces now. And that's something to bear in mind. Thank you to Michael Barnett. You are a very kind soul. Thank you for supporting this channel. And the same goes to Harry O as well. Great work, AGATP. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you, Harry, who's a member. So legend. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. Anyway, on to the rest of the sources for this area. Here we have War Mapper. Actually, I haven't referred that much to War Mapper as of late. The gossips say the eastern flank of the outskirts of the occupied settlement of Novopokrovka has been breached, and that the tanks of the armed forces of Ukraine are entering the operational space in that area. In other words, they're fighting on the outskirts of Novopokrovka with mechanized equipment. Verbovy-Novopokrovka axis. Ukrainians have taken control of the Russian defensive lines and are consolidating their gains. There's some footage there. I can't show you that, but there's, you know, war footage and whatnot. We're going to come to that in a second. So what I am thinking at the moment is that you are having activity on the edges now of Novopokrovka. We know that there have been Ukrainian tanks there. That was over 24 hours ago. It's probably 36 hours ago. You had tanks operating there. I would assume that the Ukrainians would be advancing, and there are some claims now that they, as the War Monitor said, rumors are that the tanks are operating around here. So I think Novoprokopivka, basically today, you're going to start seeing a lot of activity within Novoprokopivka. There is a claim from a Russian, well, not from Russian sources, from Theti mapping. I talked to you about how there were some trenches that were between Robotne, just to the north here, and Novoprokopivka, and they were difficult for the Ukrainians to overcome. And on the left-hand side, on the western side of those trenches, was like almost looked like an alien's face with two antennae. And I said, I'm pretty sure that's been taken by the Ukrainians as well as all these other trench lines out this way. It turned, well, he's claiming that actually that's probably still controlled by the Russians. And I had heard that rumor before, but that was some days back. That was like 4-5 days ago now. I don't know whether Theti mapping is accurate with that still, or it could be that the Russians are still holding out in one area of the trench lines here, but they must be getting one hell of a pounding with artillery and all sorts there, because the rest of the trench lines are Ukrainian and they would know exactly where the Russians are there. So yeah, that. Just throw that one in there. Right, we're going to move to the west now to this attack towards Luhove, where the Russians have been pushed back north of Zerebianki. And here, one of the last claims, well, there's not any claim about sort of movements of territory here, but OSINT Technical shares some footage here of a JDAM being used at night. So that's Ukrainian aviation operating at night. You can see the shockwaves coming out from this. So the JDAM are the dumb munitions that are adapted to be guided and glide munitions from aviation, therefore extending their range and precision as well. So they've got GPS guidance. So they can be jammed. There were some complaints about them being jammed by Russian electronic warfare, but I think it's quite significant to see these being actively used, to see them being used on a front line here, and to be used at night. So there's a lot to be garnered from that. And I'm wondering whether that also suggests that electronic warfare might have been degraded in the area. We know that some Ukrainian analysts, or not analysts, some Ukrainian spokespeople have been saying that's actually their objective number one in certain areas is electronic warfare. So we know that sometimes the Russians have a competitive advantage over the Ukrainians with electronic warfare in certain elements, certain parts of the front line, and it could be that that's been degraded, and hence the use of JDAMs there. I think they need to use them a lot more than they are, but yeah, there you go. Right, and then moving to Kherson. So Russian mill blogger the 13th has said, in the Kherson direction, I have a question for the command of the 22nd Army Corps in a language they understand. What the F? Is there no artillery preparation before the landing of troops on these effing islands? These crests are like cockroaches. How long will you kill the guys? And then expletive. Or have you run out of expletive shells? Right? So I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. I just remember my language teaching and how I've taught my kids. Yeah, I think this guy's a bit angry. I'm getting that sense here. He's just a little bit angry that something's not going well. And I think it seems to be that in the area, when the Russians are being sent to do these attacks on these islands, and we heard this from the other week when they had a whole attack group. Well, it wasn't a whole attack group. They got part of their attack group onto an island, and then they didn't have enough boats to get the rest of them on. And then the bunch on the island, I think, lost comms, and they got hammered by Ukrainian artillery, and it was all a complete disaster. And this is kind of talking to that, which is, why aren't we clearing out these islands with our own artillery first before we send our units in there? And it could well be because they don't have that artillery to pull on. It could be because of communication issues with electronic warfare from the Ukrainians. All sorts of reasons could be given. It could just be incompetent command from the Russian, command and control. But yeah, so things aren't going well, evidently, somewhere in the Kherson region. Thanks so much to Three Birds. Thank you for your time, effort, and dedication, Jonathan. I was thinking about this the other day, right? I haven't had a day of not doing videos since sometime last year. I even did one, I don't know, for you hardcore fans, I even did one on Christmas Day, right? So I've done one I've done at least one, sometimes 5 videos every day for I don't know how long. It's probably going on for 12 months or something. So yeah, but thanks a lot, Three Birds. Really, really appreciate that. And Peter Vinker as well. Thank you. Have a nice day, Jonathan. I plan on doing so afterwards. Thanks, Peter. Really appreciate that. Right. So just wanted to go to a poll. Now that we've gone through the front line, I mean, that's all I've got to say. Not a massive amount of information, but now we've gone through the front line. I just want to get a sense of what other people, you guys, think about how it's going. Now, we're all in the kind of open source intelligence community, aren't we? We're listening to more granular detail than the mainstream media. Mainstream media present this idea that things are going badly, or that it's a stalemate, or this and that. Cold tea. But what do we think when we have a much greater, I think, understanding of reality? So I asked my members, hey members, poll time. How do you feel about the Ukrainian armed forces situation and chances for a successful counteroffensive? Understood that this is a vague and subjective question, right? So just a general sense. I gave 5 options. Basically, awesome, okay, so, a bit bad, rubbish, right? So your 5 options. 23%. So about a quarter of people think it's going really well. Most people, 56%, think it's going well, but not great. It's going all right. 12% so, and 9% not great, but not terrible, right? And no one thinks it's a shocker. So some interesting comments here. I obviously can't go through them all, but I just want to share a couple with you. Let's go to Denius Maximus. I'm a 25-year US Army veteran and war history fan, current government employee working with Ukrainians in Germany. Interesting. How could anyone go from expecting them to lose in 3 days to not winning fast enough? I think that's such a good point. On the one hand, you're like, oh, you guys are going to lose within 3 days. That's what actually, most of the intelligence analysts in the world were saying, and most of the mainstream media was expecting. And now, a year and a half later, it's like, come on, you're not going quick enough. It's a stalemate. Oh, we need to do appeasement now. Oh, you guys better do a deal with Putin. It's like, what? So from those we have trained, he says, from 2014, and those we're training here now, I can tell you that we see victory in their eyes and in how resilient they are. I'm very proud of them as we stay in contact. They will win. That's awesome, Dennis. My goodness, if you want to come on and talk about your experiences, please feel welcome. I actually think it's going better than expected, says Matt Bishop. I have quite a few friends who send me videos, and oh my FG, they have kahunas, big kahunas. I am amazed at what they go through and keep smiling, but realistically, they don't have the equipment they need. And those defenses were massive and complex. Unlike others, I don't expect the counteroffensive to end soon. There are still a lot of forces to be committed, and there is less rain in the south. I think that's a really good last point as well. I think this counteroffensive will go on to the winter. And last of all, I'll say Mitch, good old Mitch, he says, I'm in the good but not great camp. Here's my 2 cents. Given the air superiority situation or current lack thereof for the Ukrainians, to be specific, I'm struggling to see how one could expect a vastly different situation on the ground. All things considered, I believe the Ukrainians have done rather well with some rather crappy cards in hand. And having said that, I consider the fact that their airspace is still contested to be a win of sorts in light of the initial expectations for the Russians and their numerical advantage in that domain. Absolutely agree with all of this. And if I can believe what I see on the data side, vague and murky as it is, the Ukrainians are eroding the Russians consistently at a favorable rate. When and if this loss aggregation results in dramatic shifts on the battlefield in the near term is prediction, that's well above my pay grade. I'm hopeful, however, that it comes to fruition sooner rather than later, with some Western supplied air assets coming online next year, specifically the more anti-radiation weapons fielded on these platforms and actively blinding Russia, the better. I feel this will be crucial pivot points in the conflict. Really good points. And I think also with ATACMS, and we're going to talk about this in a second, very shortly actually, with ATACMS coming online and distance munitions shells, so rocket cluster munitions, rocket cluster munitions apparently are being agreed upon as well. I think that's huge. Thank you very much for memberships being given out by you guys. Really appreciate that. Raimi Stevens becoming a member. Thank you. Very kind. And good old Tom. I'm going to do a chat with Tom. He's a flag expert. He's a vexillologist. He is an expert in flags, and we're going to have a chat. We'll probably do it on my Atypical Philosopher channel, but I'm going to invite you all along to that to learn about flags and the psychology of flags and how they're created. So please come and watch that. It's going to be really interesting. So he asked, what do you think of the recent BBC News coverage of the war? I think it's almost sympathetic to Russia, especially their piece on depleted uranium. I haven't watched it, actually, as I move away from, and I'm quite a fan of the BBC. I'm not like rabidly against them like many. I think they sit directly in the middle, but sometimes they don't give strong enough opinions because they want to sit in the middle. So they end up trying not to annoy the left, trying not to annoy the right, and in the end don't say an awful lot. They're quite good on factual reporting without the kind of opinion around it. Nonetheless, I think a lot of mainstream media outlets suffer from the same thing, which is they have to say something which is contrary to get the clicks and to get the views. And in order to do that, you have to say something like, "Oh, it's going really badly," or "It's going amazingly," and you have to go to one of those two extremes to get people to engage. If you're going to say, "Do you know what? It's pretty tough on the front line, but actually the Ukrainians are attriting at a pretty favourable rate," people are going to be like, all right, like that's the truth. Like my idea of the truth is, all things considered, without exactly what Mitch says, without air superiority, they're having to do the job of the Air Force with their artillery, and in doing that, it's taking a lot longer in this kind of shaping period. And as a result, they're doing a really good job of attriting those forces, but they're not taking any territory. Particularly, there's incrementally taking territory, bite and hold, bite and hold. You're like, try and fit that into a nice, snappy headline. It doesn't really work. So I think it's sad that the mainstream media have to be like that. I don't know about their depleted uranium. It's annoying because the whole depleted uranium thing is nonsense. TASS, basically the Russian MOD, that's their media outlet, reported in 2018, so before the war, about how they're happily using depleted uranium shells, the Russians, and it's not a problem, blah, blah, blah. And then a few years later, you're like, you can't use depleted uranium. It's et cetera, et cetera. It's like, you've got them and you use them. But yeah, so there is that. Thanks so much, Paul Gilbert, for becoming a member. And thank you very much to Hamptons, Long Island. Hi, Jonathan. In my opinion, Russia has exposed, and thank you, Tom, by the way, Russia has exposed its playbook to the world. This will set Russia back 30 years. They were perceived to be stronger than they are. They are a paper army. I think they were never, this whole war is fascinating because it shows that you can project yourself across the world to be something that you I say very obviously aren't, but it wasn't obvious. It might be if we could investigate more thoroughly, but it wasn't that obvious. Otherwise, we would have known it. But we thought Russia would prevail within 3 days, and it didn't, precisely because their army is shoddy. It's been poorly maintained. It's poorly trained, etc., etc. All the problems we know. Logistically, it's a nightmare. There's been corruption endemic within the institution for decades and decades, and as a result, and together with what the Ukrainians have done in basically degrading the Russian military by 50%, they are done for 30 years. The Russians, like if we froze the conflict now and just gave Russia, I don't know, all of that they want in Ukraine, right, and just say, right, now let's start again, Russia wouldn't be able to do anything for 30 years. That's the end of their kind of imperialist conquest. They're screwed, and economically they're in trouble, which means that militarily they can't pay for that military to be, to be rebuilt. So yeah, it's they were perceived to be far stronger than they are indeed, and it's a huge issue for them and their desires on sort of global hegemony. Right. We're going to go to military aid, and then I'm going to go back to some of those. This is some great conversation that comes out these super chats. So thank you very much for them, and thanks to Hampton, Long Island. There, that's awesome, Hamptons, Long Island. Right now, this is going back to Putin. Putin lost 71,500 people, 543 tanks, and almost 18,000 various armored vehicles during their counter-offensive. Putin says, sorry, Ukraine lost. So Putin is spouting some grade A horse manure. Ukraine lost 71,500 people. So 3 months. So this is June, July, August. Yeah, 3 and a bit months. They've lost 543 tanks, 71,500 people. They'd basically be unable to operate at all if they'd lost that many, and almost 18,000 various armored vehicles. If that's well, how many, right, Poots, me old mate, how many Bradleys have you seen destroyed? Yeah, some of them have been destroyed, but how many have been given? How many Mardas have you seen destroyed? How many CV90s have you seen be destroyed? Is it what, 3? I don't know how many have been able to be recovered though. 3 CV90s, okay, etc., etc., etc. How many Turkish Kirpis and Cobras and all these other vehicles? Loads of vehicles from Europe and Turkey that we don't talk about often, but they've got a whole bunch of them. How many Challengers have you seen taken out? How many Leopard 2s are out for good? How many Leopard 1s have you seen destroyed? How many Abrams have you seen destroyed? How many? Do you know what? You're painting a picture that is obviously nonsense. My question is always, and I don't know the answer to this. My question is, how much do you believe here? Like, do you believe that, Putin? Because we talked before about how Putin doesn't use the internet, doesn't have a smartphone, thinks the internet is a product of the CIA, and is incredibly paranoid. Which, sorry to repeat myself, I always say this, but he lives in an epistemic bubble, which means that like his epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth, right? And he lives in a bubble where people deliver him information in different colored folders, literally, because he doesn't use the internet and stuff. And, you know, he gets paper folders, different colors for different things about what's going on. But what that means is all of his information is delivered to him by a set bunch of people. And he has no way of verifying what is given to him other than going back to the very people that are giving him that information, or going to his SFB. But you don't know that the FSB aren't in league with the information givers, right? So he has no way of disconfirming or confirming the information he's given, which means if the Russian MOD are saying, well, yeah, 71,500 people have died, 543 tanks and 18,000 various armored vehicles have been taken out of the Ukrainians, how does he confirm that? How does he know that's true? Or how does he know it's not true? And the answer is he doesn't. And so there's every possibility that he genuinely believes that. And then the problem is garbage in, garbage out. And we talked about this at the beginning of the war. I wrote an article about this. Like, he lost the war within 3 days because he couldn't achieve what he set out to achieve, because what he set out to achieve was insanely unrealistic because he didn't have the right information. Garbage in, garbage out. If you are given garbage information, you'll make decisions on the basis of that garbage information, and those decisions will be as bad as the information you're given. So if that's still a problem a year and a half later, and he still has no way of verifying that information, he's in deep trouble. He added that if the US believes that Ukraine is ready to negotiate, then Ukraine needs to cancel Zelensky's decree banning negotiations with Russia. Well, that ain't going to happen, I don't think, because, you know, you're not going to get Crimea as far as the Ukrainians are concerned. Right. This is massive news just out today. Swedish government, says Sveriges Radio, Swedish government intends to instruct the Ministry of Defense to consider the possibility of transferring Gripen fighters to Ukraine. The country's authorities want to investigate how this transfer will affect Sweden's defense capabilities. Wow. And you can bet your bottom dollar Saab are going to be like, please do this, we need to do this. Saab are going to be wanting to sell these airframes to the rest of the world, and there's going to be no greater advert than Ukraine, right? So Saab are going to be keen, and if the manufacturers are keen, it should happen. If you've got government will and manufacturers will, then, and we already knew months ago that they were going to start training them on the Gripen. Now, if you're going to say we are going to pay for training of Ukrainian pilots on a Gripen, there's no point doing that if you're not going to give them Gripens eventually. So I think this is just, things were set in place, and you hear about them as if they've suddenly decided this, but actually there's a long-term plan to all of this stuff. And you can argue this with the F-16s as well, that, there's all this argument to and fro, but it was probably decided well early on, and a framework of dates was put in place, and things come out, and it looks like everyone's arguing, but actually, I don't know that it was. I don't know. So I swing all over the shop on this because there's this argument, and I want to do a segment on this. There's still this argument. I proposed this argument at the beginning of the war. I actually thought this was definitely the case. I'm not so sure now. You had back in April last year, Lloyd Austin for the department for the DoD in the US saying we want to degrade the Russian army such that they can't do this again. So you had this idea that the Americans wanted to thoroughly degrade the Russians, the Russian war machine. And these theories abound that they're drip feeding the Ukrainian armed forces in such a way that it fundamentally degrades the Russian army. If you gave them everything at once and the Ukrainians destroyed the Russian army overnight, right, on a really quick offensive, actually it wouldn't fundamentally destroy them. They would lose a whole bunch of stuff, go and lick their wounds, but most of their equipment would still be available, in deep reserves or whatever. But by extending the length of the war and then giving the Ukrainians things that they need just when they're like desperate for them, then the Ukrainians just gradually attrit the Russians so fundamentally that, as I said earlier, they can't do anything for 30 years. That's exactly what Lloyd Austin was kind of talking about previously. So the question is, are the US, for example, really doing this on purpose, drip feeding stuff on purpose, or are they genuinely giving them stuff when they can, when there's a political will? It's not this calculated plan. And I thought it was at the beginning. I did advocate that. I'm not sure it is now. I just think there's lots of arguments going on, and there are different reasons. And I think there's a kind of brinkmanship, or the kind of like, okay, the Germans gave this, so now we're going to give this, with tanks or whatever. I think it's just complicated and messy. But there are plans with timescales on them as well. Sorry, a lot of talking. The Biden administration is close to approving the shipment of longer-range missiles packed with cluster bombs to Ukraine. So these are these M76, is it, or M26? The rockets with submunitions in them that are basically like cluster munition shells that you fire from artillery, but you can fire these from multiple launch rocket systems, and they go a lot further. The US is close to approving the shipment of longer-range missiles packed with cluster bombs to Ukraine, giving Ukraine the ability to cause significant damage deeper within Russian-occupied territories, according to 4 US officials, and that's Reuters reporting that. So it looks like that will happen along with ATACMS, and that's really significant. Thank you so much to Smith, legend of the universe, mate. Thank you. She didn't speak like that, but and Frank Vanderstam, great sound today. I think you hit the sweet spot. Yeah. Only took me like a million attempts. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that. AJ Simo, thanks for this, mate. Keep on keeping on, JP. Phrase shamelessly stolen from Bobby. Thank you. I will keep on, indeed, keeping on. Thank you so much, AJ. And finally, for now, Mark Bijq for the wine fund. That's a fund that is it. I have an empty place for my wine bottles, although I have a place full of empty wine bottles. I don't know what that says. Great work as always. Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much for your kindness, Mark. I really appreciate all your support, guys. Right. So, first thing, 58th thing to say today. Germany are awesome at the moment. They've come, I keep saying this, but they've come such a long way. 5,000 helmets. Well, what are you doing? To, yeah, we're going to pretty much give you everything. They have done amazingly to the point of fact that Europe has now overtaken US in terms of aid as a whole. Depends how you count this up, but I talked about this with the Kiel Institute. Germany are easily, I think, now the second biggest contributor in terms of military aid, especially when you add on the aid that they give through their funding of the EU, so on and so forth. So Germany have really come up amazingly. Germany will allocate another 20 million euros to Ukraine to the 380 million euros allocated earlier as part of humanitarian aid. This was announced by German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock during her visit to Kiev. So she's just been in Kiev. In addition, the German government has instructed the Rheinmetall defense concern to supply Ukraine with 40 more Marder infantry fighting vehicles, which you heard about. The order is being paid for by the German federal government, and the first deliveries will begin this year. As a result of this order, the total number of Marder infantry fighting vehicles delivered to Ukraine will increase to 80. She seems to have been talking to, is that Kuleba, the foreign minister there, who is regressed to the 1970s by the looks of it, so good on him. The decision to send German Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine has not yet been made. Nevertheless, the process of transferring Taurus missiles is moving forward, said Kuleba. Ukraine and Germany also signed a memorandum on the construction of a wind farm around the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Now, this is interesting to me. We have a very clear statement. I'm just going to concentrate on that wind farm bit. This has come out. So today, I did have an article, but I've forgotten to put it up. Today, it was found out that the the World Bank, that is saying, oh, we're going green, and all this. They have last year funded to the tune of $3.7 billion the fossil fuel industry. I know some of you get annoyed when I talk about this, but come on, we've got to future-proof here. Like, would you like to live next to a coal-fired power station? No. I prefer to live looking at a wind farm, quite frankly. Pollution, but also just sustainability going forward in terms of renewables versus finite resources. But what are we doing? Still $3.7 billion worth of funding. And then when you talk about the negative externalities, I could bore you with the economics of this, but I'll save it for another time. I've told you many times before, but we subsidize the fossil fuel industry in terms of negative externalities. Forbes ran a brilliant piece on this to the tune of gazillions, right? And yet we don't fund the green industries to the remotely to the same level. Why do the fossil fuel industries get that much money? It annoys me. Anyway, so deciding to build that next to the remnants of a nuclear power plant that went wrong, I think is interesting, but significant. Thanks to Germany for doing that. A very clear statement from Germany's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock. Reach and liberate the people behind Russia's huge mine belt. Ukraine needs longer range weapons like the ones delivered by France and Great Britain. So she's being strong on giving Taurus, so the Germans giving Taurus. However, Berlin will not automatically supply Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine, even if the US decides to supply ATACMS long-range missiles to Kiev. So it's not quite a kind of third-party quid pro quo sort of thing, this brinkmanship, or at least they're claiming it's not. That was stated by Boris Pistorius. So you've got the Green coalition, Green politician who's a foreign minister saying, yeah, we should give Taurus. And we've got the defense minister for the SPD saying, no, it's not necessarily going to be the case. I really hope it is the case. They need to do that. It's super important. Thank you so much for David Reutenberg. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Appreciate that, David. Super thanks. And thank you to JR. I'm not worthy, JR. Thank you so much for your support. I should be supporting you like that, but I know I've offered and you said no. What do you think of Musk and chemical weapons? Is this a joke? I think that is a joke, and it's funny, and I like what you've done there, JR. I think you know what I think about Musk and chemical weapons. Actually, we're going to come to Musk in a little while. So, and interestingly, all the arguments about chemical weapons, I did a segment on chemical weapons yesterday. You'll find that the fact that we haven't banned nuclear weapons undermines virtually every argument about banning chemical weapons. Because as soon as you argue chemical weapons should be banned, my whole point of doing that yesterday wasn't to say we shouldn't ban chemical weapons. It was to say the whole thing's a hot mess, and you'll find that justification for banning chemical weapons doesn't really work. It's not consistent, and actually it's fairly arbitrary. Keep them, fair enough, keep them. I'm not saying don't I'm not saying unban them, but I'm saying that the rational justification for banning them isn't quite what people thought, historically speaking. And actually those justifications don't really work, and they don't really work when you take into account that all those major nations are still happy to use nuclear weapons. They're not banned. It's like they're like the worst kind of chemical, if you want to call them that, physical weapons. So go figure. Anyway, thanks, JR. You're just stirring. Right. Germany again. Germany, awesome. Rare footage of one of the total of 6 Vicent 1MCs that Germany has delivered to Ukraine. Another 36 will follow in the future. The Vicent 1MC is built by FFG on a chassis of a Leopard 1 and is an effective minesweeper. You didn't hear that. It's very loud. I've got them in my ears. So that is a very effective minesweeper, although apparently it also doubles up as a combine harvester. So that's good. Get him to work. Farmers are using them. That's awesome. Another 36 of them. Right. Rheinmetall, Germany, again, it's a gift that keeps on giving, has supplied Ukraine with a mobile field hospital. Hospital encompasses 32 beds. I talked about one of these previously, but was it a French one or is it the same one? 32 beds, an operating room, X-ray and computer tomography, a laboratory, a pharmacy, administrative and personnel tracts. RMS will also be supplying Ukraine with 2 medical facilities in late 2023 and early 2024. This is absolutely phenomenal stuff here from... That's massive noise in my ear there that you didn't hear again. I mean, look at all this stuff. It's brand spanking new. This is an incredibly, incredibly valuable Rheinmetall provision there. I don't know who's paying for it, but that is really good. Rheinmetall is so important in this. And again, Rheinmetall here. The German government will purchase 2 batteries of 35mm. This is just like Germany awesome day. Skynet's anti-aircraft gun systems from Rheinmetall for delivery to Ukraine next year. These are kind of pallet platforms. You can put them on the back of whatever, or you can just leave them there to do their thing. They are pretty incredible bits of kit, this kind of like Gepard times 10. So much so that I'm fairly sure other European nations are also buying these. The same with Iris-T are selling quite a bit at the moment. This goes back to what I've talked about previously, which is that this war is a stimulus for an awful lot of economy as well. So if you think the defense industrial complex is an important aspect of your nation's economy, then there are economic arguments for the provision of aid to Ukraine. Right, moving on from bleeding Germany. I mean, done enough good. Move over. Right, the Ukrainian World Congress, who is I think they're based in Canada. These are Ukrainian World Congress. They are established in 1967. The Ukrainian World Congress is a global voice for the Ukrainian people worldwide, international non-governmental organization representing the interests of over 20 million Ukrainians in the diaspora. So Ukraine is abroad. They have donated 29 vehicles to the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Force, 13 FV432. So these are 1 Stormer and 1 Shielder. That is a Stormer is a air defense system, short-range air defense system, UK one, on one of these kind of platforms. That's not these. So these are all basically British vehicles there that have been bought on the, I presume, on the sort of second-hand market type thing. 4 MTLBUs, 10 GAZ-66. So a whole bunch of equipment here being given to Ukraine. That's fantastic from private concerns. Arms dealers, that's the word I was looking for. So there you go. Thank you to them. That's brilliant. UK Hydrographic Office has transferred geodetic equipment and cartographic software to Ukraine, the UK government reports. The State Hydrographic Service of Ukraine will receive equipment worth 1.6 million quid. It will help ensure the safety of the seas around Ukraine and support commercial shipping in the face of ongoing Russian attacks. Stuff like this, it kind of goes under the radar sometimes, which is really important that Ukraine is still able to do all the things a nation wants to be able to do to operate in that case safely or do the work it needs to do. And finally, in military aid, the Antonov company has created a center for drones, according to Reuters. The new drone center was open to expand drone manufacturing capabilities and provide expertise and service support to private manufacturers. Right, brilliant news. All of that stuff I've just said, look at all these tabs at the top here. And I'm going to go back to what I always say, sorry to repeat myself. Look at every single one of these tabs. What's the question I'm going to ask? What are Russia getting? So for each of these instances of ATACMS, Gripen, long-range cluster rockets, Skynet, hydrographic stuff, minesweepers, etc., etc., etc. What are Russia getting? And the answer is square root of naff all. They ain't getting jack, which is why our old friend Vladimir Putin, because apparently Vlad is not short for Vladimir, Putin is getting Kim Jong-un round from North Korea round for a pint to talk what he can get off North Korea. And in fact, we're going to come on to that in a little while. But he's so desperate that he's going to North Korea and Iran for weapons, and ideally China, as far as he's concerned. But that's a little bit more difficult. Right. We're going to go on to geopolitical stuff. I'm just going to go back to you guys. Thank you for bearing with me. Smal Lakan says, have a beer, Jonathan. Do you know what? I could really do with a beer. As I told you this morning, my first one, 2.5 recordings of that video. Oh, I really needed that cup of tea. You talk too much. Yep, this is true, but keep it up. And we still have the ashes, by the way. Don't make me come over there and hurt you, Smell. No, thank you very much. You do still have the ashes, but 2-2, and the draw, we were going to whoop you. So you were saved by the rain. Sorry, cricket talk there. But nonetheless, thanks, Smell. I really appreciate your support. And before I go on to the geopolitical stuff, thank you very much to James Myers. Great insights into open source value, which may equal that of drones in modern warfare. You're seeing the evolution of warfare, and we are seeing it in real time. We're seeing, like, literally from this kind of stuff I was talking to you about like a year ago. So, like, what I'm telling you now is happening, like what the drones can do, what I'm showing, the kind of videos we're looking at. We are seeing that evolution in real time. We're also seeing open source intelligence play an absolutely crucial part and an ever increasing crucial part in this war. It's fascinating to see it all develop. And finally, before I go on, thank you to Wyatt DeBoard. Love how triggered you get over Trump and Musk. No more money from the USA. Don't keep doing this, Wyatt. Don't do this. I've got to stay on target, Pierce. Stay on target. Star Wars reference for you. Thank you, Wyatt. Right. Okay. Geopolitical stuff. Ukraine and Germany again, signed a declaration of intent to build a wind power plant around Chernobyl. Oh, this is where I had all the stuff. I did have it. It just wasn't in the military aid. According to the publication, during a visit to Ukraine, the head of the German Foreign Ministry, Annalena Baerbock, noted that cooperation between Ukraine and Germany in the energy sector could be closer. So this is really important, especially going forward. I mean, obviously, they need stuff instantly now. But going forward into the winter months, Ukraine is going to be really struggling to make sure that their energy infrastructure is not hit by the Russians. This is going to be one of their major concerns. They got away with it a little bit last year. The winter wasn't that cold, and the Russians succeeded only to a degree. I do wonder about the Russians' use of their missiles, if they'd use them all at military targets or all at particular targets. Right, they spread them too thin, and as a result, don't do enough damage. But you need to either go for one place and absolutely knacker that thing, whatever it is, or just go for completely different targets, like military targets completely. Give up on the civilian infrastructure. It's a waste of time. I think they'll probably look back at this war and realize some of the really big mistakes they've made. Now, talking about just really quickly, because this is actually important to the Ukraine war and the whole Russia thing. So I've already talked to you about how the World Bank has spent billions of dollars backing fossil fuel in 2022, like $3.7 billion. And that kind of stuff is prevalent. And people complain about, but batteries and electric cars and you need lithium and blah, blah, blah. Well, here's an interesting thing. So we've already heard that Norway's had a rich seam of different elements that they found, so they can now make batteries until whatever year. Well, apparently a deposit of lithium has recently been discovered along the Nevada-Oregon border, and it may be among the world's largest, according to a new scientific paper. The deposit in the McDermott caldera could contain between 20 to 40 million metric tons of lithium. That is huge news for the electric vehicles industry, the photovoltaic industry, basically. And why this is important, because this is all about global hegemonies, power around the world. Russia has power. Why? How does Russia have power? Russia basically only has power because, as Senator McCain said, there are, like, what is it? It's a nation. It's a gas station of a nation, or whatever the thing he said was. Their power is in their hydrocarbons, and if you take that power away from them, then they will lose a massive amount of global influence, and obviously through losing a lot of money. So it's about finding alternatives to Russian oil and gas, both for like environmental reasons. But you can forget that if you're anti-environment for some weird reason, like you want to be against the environment, it's like that's an odd position to be. But if you're anti-environment because you think it's all liberal lefties, then think of it in terms of energy security. Think of it in terms of being on the right side of the economics of it, right? You don't bet on coal and oil going forward. It's got limited attraction now. You want to be betting on something like this. And if America finds a massive source of lithium, then that can have a huge impact on the power, the geopolitical chess game between Russia and indeed China and the US. That is hugely important. I'd need to look into that further, but together with the Norwegian find recently, that has huge significance. Right. This is British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said that Russia attacked, I mean, this is mental, attacked a Liberian-flagged civilian vessel in the Black Sea on August the 24th. So this is going back a couple of weeks with Caliber cruise missiles. According to Sunak, all the missiles were shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. Quote, Putin is trying to win a war he can't win, and these attacks show how desperate he is. True. By striking cargo ships and Ukrainian infrastructure, Russia is damaging the rest of the world, said the British diplomatic chief, James Cleverly. Now, I wonder if they'd actually, I'm not suggesting they should have done this, but not if they didn't let it happen, if it just so happened that it did happen, that maybe the air defense couldn't shoot down those two. Imagine that Liberian vessel was blown up by Russian cruise missiles. I wonder what the world's reaction would have been, because it's been fairly muted in terms of what's been going on in Odessa, Reni, and Ismail with regard to the export of grain, right, and hitting grain storage and infrastructure. What would have happened? Would we have actually had to stand up and do something much more robust in light of a civilian cargo ship being blown up by Russian cruise missiles? I don't know. UK declassifies intelligence on the same topic. This on Russian attack on a civilian ship. It says that the Russian warship shot two Caliber missiles, at a Liberian flag cargo ship, berthed in port. So it's in port on August the 24th. Both missiles were shot down. Quote, the Russian attacks have so far destroyed 280,000 tons of grain, enough to feed, and this is it, right? Enough to feed over 1 million people for a year, more than the total Russia promised to donate to African countries. Russia has destroyed that. Food for 1 million people for a year. Like, if that's not a massive war crime, I don't know what is. Continues. UK sorry, this is someone else actually. I won't get into that argument. So that is massively significant. Right. Staying on the topic of UK, the UK has banned visa-free transit for Russians at its airports. The new rules come into force on October the 6th. Until this date, only those Russians who managed to buy tickets before September the 8th, 2023, will be able to fly to the UK without transit visa. So it's about making life as uncomfortable for Russians as possible. I think that's really important. Louise Foley, thank you so much. It's another Aussie. It looks like you cracked it. This live stream is going great. Apart from the accent, Pierce, you haven't cracked that. It's not only bad, it's insulting to the Australians. Thank you, Louise. I really appreciate your support. And thank you for saying the live stream is going great. I can't read all the great comments that I'm sure are there. Oh, Matthew's back. Matthew, I could have, you could be on this live stream. I sent you an email. You probably sent one to me back. Anyway, I'll say what he says. Thank you, mate. Throwing down the gauntlet. This is going to win the biggest donation today. You've won my heart already, Matt. Thank you, buddy. I don't have to do an Aussie accent to you because you've got a weird Aussie-British hybrid accent, which I'm sure you've thrown in some Ukrainian edges to that as well with being married to a Ukrainian. Thank you, Matthew. You are an officer and a gentleman. I really appreciate that. And I'll flag you up again for being generally a legend. So continuing along this idea of like the hegemony and China, we're going to concentrate a little bit on China now. This annoys the bejesus at me. When I saw, this is her, a Chinese opera singer, when I saw that Ukrainian Nazis are killing the children of Donbass, It caused a flurry of angry emotions in me, so I decided to come to Donbass and help the children, said Chinese opera singer Wang Fang in response to her visit to Mariupol. Next to her is her husband, Zhao Xiaoping. He is a member of the People's Political Consultative Council under the Chinese Communist Party. Too many C's and P's there. He blames the destruction of the drama theatre not on Russia, but on Ukraine. So these guys are just complete victims to Russian disinformation. They're victims and they're being manipulated. And it annoys me a lot. I hate untruths, and I hate it when they come to fruition like this. And also supports Russian propaganda, in particular about protecting local residents from NATO attacks. That is really annoying. You can see her here. In Mariupol, Chinese opera singer Wang Fang sang Katyusha at the ruins of the drama theatre in which Russia killed dozens to hundreds of people. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry called this an example of complete moral degradation and expects an explanation from China. 100%. Well done, Ukraine Foreign Ministry. I'd call them out. I'd love to sit down with people like this and just have an argument, and like properly, like, okay, you're espousing this. I want to work out in this argument whether, one, you believe what you're saying, and if you don't believe what you're saying, you're morally bankrupt, or you're forced to do this, in which case the people forcing you are morally bankrupt, or both. And two, if you do believe this, I'm going to disabuse you of that, because I can do that fairly easily. I'm hankering for an argument, right? That's why I love talking to our good friends Clive Engel, Trevor Shea, and all these other Russian trolls. Anyway, China is using AI to generate, or AI-generated images to spread disinformation. Quote, the most recent effort revealed by researchers from Microsoft and a range of other organizations suggests that Beijing is making more direct attempts to sow discord in the United States. Right. This is super, super important. I've talked to you before about a number of times about, say, the Internet Research Agency. I did that whole video on trolls. I've done 2 videos now on trolls and bot farms, and how Russia is demonstrably meddling in US politics and UK politics and European politics, right? We know, we've got evidence that they've meddled in the US 2016 and 2020 elections. We've got evidence they meddled in the Brexit election. Now, I'm not saying that the results would be any different or anything like that. I don't want to get into those arguments, but they meddled, right? And they are consistently meddling in politics and sowing disinformation. And we are having like epistemic security. I talked about being like knowledge security is the forefront of warfare now, information warfare. And it's a huge worry and should be one of our biggest concerns going forward. One of the worries about China is waiting for them to get into this kind of business, to get into the world of influencing hearts and minds with this 5th generation warfare. And it looks like they're doing that. So from the New York Times, Shashank Joshi quoting from them saying, the researchers suggested that China was building a network of accounts that could be put to use in future information operations, including the next US election. That is a pattern that Russia set in the year also leading up to the 2016 election. So we already know that. China are looking at doing it again, right? Whatever you think, right? And whatever side they might want to be on, like, you don't want them meddling. Like, even if it helps your side out, it's unfair, and it means that your electoral system, or my electoral system, is being manipulated. If China does engage in influence operations for the election next year, US intelligence officials have assessed in recent months it is likely to try to diminish President Biden and raise the profile of former President Donald J. Trump. So that is kind of where it's at with China. They are getting involved in that game now. Talking about not quite China, but this is North Korea, going back to Putin, North Korea, sending North Korean workers to Russia is a mutual interest to the 2 countries, says the Washington Post. Its economy is experiencing a huge labor shortage. The Russian economy is screwed, actually got a labor shortage because people have either emigrated abroad to get out of going to war, or have been sent to war and are either dead or injured or at war, right? The economy has experienced a high labor shortage due to a ramp up in defense production and hundreds of thousands of Russians in the front lines in Ukraine. So not only are they lacking the people, but they've ramped up production needs. They haven't actually necessarily ramped up production because they're a bit screwed with sanctions and labor shortage. But they need more people, and they have less people, fewer people. So this not only could Russia be looking to North Korea to provide them with ammunition, but also with human beings. So there you go. Right, moving on to this next point here. We have Elizabeth Warren. Now, I've already said before previously, I like Elizabeth Warren. I think she's a sound politician and she's a good human being. But some of you on the right will completely disagree with me. I know that some of you absolutely hate her. So be it. I do like this, though. And you told me to talk about Musk, and I will. Elizabeth Warren demands probes of Elon Musk, SpaceX, after Ukraine revelations. I think no matter what you think about Warren or Musk, even if you're really overtly pro-Musk, the fact is that he is making decisions that are in the realm of the US Department of Defense, in US foreign policy, and in Ukrainian military, military activities. If he's making decisions that are that important, if he's one human being that is having that much effect in international affairs, that the elected government should be taken care of, then we need to look into this, right? There needs to be some oversight here. I don't care what you think about Musk, whether you think he's one awesome bloke. If a civilian is having that impact, then we just need to check. It might be that everything's kosher, right? Everything's fine. But we probably need to investigate that. This is an absolute no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. It needs to be investigated. Sanctions against Russia are taking their toll. You can't necessarily say this because of sanctions. However, a Russian Airbus A320, which was flying from Sochi to Omsk, has made an emergency landing in Novosibirsk region. All Western aerospace companies, such as Airbus, are not supplying spare parts, and due to this circumstance, have revoked any assurance of the safety of their produced planes. So this is pretty crazy, actually. So this essentially one of the engines caught fire in midair, and it landed in a field. This is landed in a farmer's field. It's pretty insane, this, and it's kind of now already being taken to pieces. So this is it. I'll show you there. It's landed in a farmer's field, and I think everyone got off safely. But this might be as a result of sanctions on the aerospace industry, and Russians are now flying airplanes that are, not in a good way. It's already been taken to pieces. Wow. Yeah, that's a worry for anyone wanting to fly in Russia. Right, now we're going to come on to a bit of Prince Harry. I like Prince Harry. Of all the royals, who would I most want to go and have a pint with? Every time a coconut, it's going to be Prince Harry. He'd be much more interesting to go and have a pint with than any of the others. Prince Harry in the stands with Ukrainian fans at the Invictus Games. So he's responsible for starting the Invictus Games. What are the Invictus Games, you might ask me? They are the kind of the Olympics for people who've been injured in war, in the armed forces. So paraplegics and disabled people across the armed forces get to go and represent their country at the Invictus Games. Now, as you can possibly imagine, the Ukrainians might have rather a few more potential athletes to dip into, given the war over the last year and a half. As Slavo Ukraini says, we'll tell you about our results a little later, as the competition date is still ongoing, but the announcement is that we have medals. There is also a champion from Ukraine. So there we have Harry getting together with Ukrainian disabled former armed service member there. So good stuff. Hazza. Right. Okay. Aussie T. Is there? This is amazing. With 5 already gifted, I win, says Aussie T in my best Aussie accent. Thank you, Aussie T. What incredibly generous gift you have given. Really, really do appreciate that. I've been speaking so long. I will try and wrap things up soon, guys. But thank you for your continued support. Thanks, Aussie, and thanks, Matt, as well. It's incredibly generous. Right, Council of Europe sets out principles for holding Russia accountable for war damages. I think this is so important as well. Like, moving forward, what are we going to do with Russia's moral behavior, or lack of amoral behavior? Immoral behavior, actually. The justice ministers of the Council of Europe, member and observer states, have adopted the so-called Riga principles outlining how Russia should be held accountable for the losses and damages it has caused to Ukraine. The Council announced on September the 11th. The ministers highlighted the need to ensure the proper functioning of the register of damages in Ukraine, a record of evidence and claims for damage, loss, or injury caused by the Russian aggression. Absolutely brilliant. And compare that group of people to the group of people we saw in front of the Russian International Security Services or whatever, putting up that that statue of Dzerzhinsky. I showed you in the last video. You had a whole bunch of just men in dark suits in a line, looking really depressingly somber. Anyway, that's the European Council of Europe making good decisions there. Right. Now, this is where we're going to circle back round. So I showed you a video earlier of bitumen pit burning in Russia. I've shown you day in, day out areas of Russia that are just simply on fire, right? Whether it be warehouses, whether it be factories or relay stations or whatever it is in Russia, fire is ripping through different places in Russia. Okay. And here we have this guy at the Eastern Economic Forum. This guy, what's his name? Putin. That's it. It's safer and better to invest capital in Russia, he says. Neither he nor his audience look or sound convinced. Just absolute nonsense. Let's go and see what he has to say. So he says, we're going to go through it. I'll read out the subtitles. Many of them have faced a certain amount of pressure from some partners. I want to repeat once again today, he says, that it is safer and better to definitely invest capital in Russia, both in large-scale and ambitious infrastructure projects, as well as local but no less important urban development and tourism projects. Really? Really? I mean, you're at war. There are drones flying everywhere, and there are fires popping up here, there, and everywhere. I wouldn't be convinced. And I'd tell you what, if I had a couple of $1 million to invest, I wouldn't be investing in Russia. But there you go. That's just my opinion. Right. The committee, and we're almost there, guys. We're almost there. The Committee of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recognized Russia as a dictatorship. I love this. I love this because I have been calling, I think I announced this on one of my segments ages back, that I'm going to start calling Putin a dictator because that's precisely what it is. So whenever I write articles now, my recent article, if you haven't read it, please check out my article on Kherson, Heritage Foundation, Russia, Follow the Money. It's a really substantial article I wrote about money going from Russia through Orban and Hungary through to places like the Heritage Foundation and then onto TV stations in America and opinions that are spread throughout America. But anyway, I call, for example, here, Dictator Putin, from the Dictator Putin. He is through the fascistic autocrat Viktor Orban. How to give a synonym for dictator. So I call these people what I think they are, and I think we should call Putin a dictator because that is what he is. Anyway, this is stated in an official statement published in the PACE website. The PAC committee expressed concern about the legitimacy and legality of the amendments to the Russian constitution, which allowed the dictator Putin to remain in office until 2036. I mean, that alone tells you all you need to know, right? Being able to, where have I sent that? Being able to stay in office till 2036, absolute shocker. Now, I think this is brilliant. I think more news sites and organizations should call him a dictator formally, because he is. He has changed the democratic mechanisms in the country to such a point that they are not democratic anymore. You look at the transparency index of Russia, it is both corrupt and does not have a functioning democracy. It's just absolutely nuts that people even pretend to call that a democracy. Thanks so much, Mitch. Mitch is just a ledge. Amazing stream today. Thank you. And looks like you'll be eclipsing 30K subscribers. That's amazing. I love arbitrary numbers, and 30,000 is actually the number we're going for is 30,247. that we have a big party then. Testament to your tenacity and the quality content, methinks. Thanks, Mitch. And the quality of the commenters. Like, you guys are such a phenomenal community. I'm humbled and honored to have people like Mitch, to have people like Ozzy, to have people like all of you here. You know, thank you so much, Ozzy and Matt and Louise. Thank you so much, Wyatt. I really, really appreciate all of your support. So thank you. Really great. And a big thanks to Ozzy T and Matt again. Anyway, if you have any questions, now is the time. Oops, how do I get rid of these? Please get them in now, because I'm going to end the live stream fairly soon, because do you know what? I have been talking for way too long. But yeah, that's the geopolitical landscape as it is at the moment. We've gone through the Frontline and we looked at military aid. I can feel my voice is just about to give in. And I've been going for, holy cow, just quite a long time. So I'll probably leave it here. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. I really, really appreciate all the huge support of all of you. Thanks for those who gifted memberships. I know Lawrence has had an issue before with gifting memberships. I don't really know much about that. I'll try and look into it. This from Aussie Bugger. I hope you're enjoying Southeast Asia. ATP Geopolitics, not a question, but Vlad Vexler, who is a philosopher, I really want to get together with him and chat. Last night said he's up for a stream with you. That would be absolutely fantastic. I'll have to get onto that. Cool beans. I really appreciate someone probably asking him about that. I am going to be speaking to Rick the Ukrainian soon. We're in contact, thanks to Tony Otterson. We're in contact and we'll do a co-stream together at some point. I'm still, Operator Starsky, I was due to do a stream with him on, and then that kind of fell by the wayside. I think the counteroffensive started and whatnot. And then, so I'm trying to resurrect that idea. Any other people, I might try and get Andrew Perpetua back on as well. Just reminds me, if you have a chance to show Andrew Perpetua some love, pop along to his Twitter channel, to his handle, or to his map, and show him some love there. He's got PayPal, buy me a coffee, because his mapping does cost. I use it a lot. I've shown him a bit of love recently. He's doing an absolutely stunning job, and that goes back to what I was saying about the open source intelligence community, which I think is a really vital component of this war and how we come to understand the war. As ever, with things like open source intelligence, you need to have your critical faculties about you. Critical thinking is really important, and it's very easy for all of us. Confirmation bias is the biggest one, where we will ascribe more value to evidence that supports our worldview than to evidence that doesn't support it. So, for example, like say let's pick something really contentious that half of you are going to be like it's nonsense, and half of you are going to be like, well, it's scientific, like theory, and it's out there. Say something like climate change, right? So when I look at evidence to support climate change, I might look at a paper, right, and I'll ascribe that, I'm going to make this up arbitrarily, but I might ascribe that 80 out of 100 like value because it supports my view. But I might look at a piece of evidence or a claim or whatever against, you know, climate change consensus, and I might say, oh, that's only, I only rate that as 20, but not on the basis of the actual evidence, but on the basis of what confirms my worldview or disconfirms it. So I might give that 80 because it confirms my worldview, but 20 because it disconfirms it, rather than say, what does it actually say? And how valuable is that evidence just objectively? And it's really difficult for us to objectively analyze evidence because our desires get in the way all the time. So we need to be really aware that whenever we're reading something, so if you are a climate science denier, think about this next time. When you are you overtly going to look for something that disconfirms climate science? So you're looking for evidence in a way that biases your selection. And then when you find that evidence, do you give it more value just because it confirms your worldview? The same with me, right? We all suffer from this. So the best we can do is kind of mitigate that. The same with the Russia, Ukraine. Like most of you there are going to be in support of Ukraine. So we ascribe more value to the pro-Ukrainian information. So when the general staff say that this many pieces of kit have been blown up, we go, yeah, and I'm going to give that 80 out of 100 like value points. And then when the Russians say, oh, we blew up this, we say that's 20 out of 100 because actually I don't like what you're saying there. Now, what we also are doing is using our critical faculties, hopefully, as well, which is say that actually the Russian MOD have lied to us 9 times out of 10. So the next time they say something, there is a prior probability. We call it a prior probability. So before I look at the evidence, there's already a very low probability that what they say is correct. So then when they do present something, actually we start demanding more evidence from them, a higher level of quality evidence, because actually you've just shown yourself to lie so many times before. So hopefully we are using our critical faculties as well, but don't just bury your head in the sand when the bad news comes along just because it doesn't fit with your worldview. And we must all be aware of that. Sorry to preach to the converted, no doubt. Bobby Caudle, thank you, Bobby, for your support. Again, another great supporter of the channel in terms of comments and everything. Thanks so much to all the great commenters out there and all the members of the channel who are commenting in the live stream. You guys are just making it such a great community. Anyway, I really am going to go now. This is curtains for me for today. I don't think I'm going to have any energy for anything else, so this will be my last one today. Thanks. So as you can see, goodbye all. And then Jonathan starts to talk about climate change, and I followed that a lot, sometimes as a job. Excellent. I know some people turn off when I talk about things like that. Like, I was with you about all the war stuff. As soon as you start talking about that, I think you're a plonker. I was like, yeah. Again, but think about, why is your brain reacting like that? Why do you suddenly go, ugh? You start talking about that, ugh. Like, that's psychology working and not rationality working. So it's questioning not only our conclusions but our intuitive reactions to stuff. We should question. The famous physicist Richard Feynman said the easiest person to fool is yourself. So we're really easy to be fooled, so we've got to be careful about how we might be being fooled. And so psychology is we believe things due to primarily psychology rather than rationality, and that's a real shame. So we need to be much more open to being convinced by rational arguments. Thanks, Da Vinci. That's really great, and I will pass it on. Thank you very much. Andrew is doing a sterling effort. Anyway, right, for the 9th time, I'm going to say I'm going to go now. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Speak to you soon. All the very best. Big love to you all, and I really appreciate your support. And thanks to all you very, very generous people out there. Toodle pips. Oh, I'm still here.